We know that many organizations, programs, and people within Seattle rely on federal funding to carry out their work and live healthy lives. And what is clear is that major changes are underway, and we, as local leaders, should be tuned in.
That's Seattle City Council member Alexis Mercedes Rink talking about a new committee that the city has formed as actions from the Trump administration continue to reverberate locally and internationally. What is the Select Committee on Federal Administration and Policy Changes all about? And what about a new plan to incentivize downtown landowners to convert their properties from business to residential uses? Plus, Seattle has had a new stay out of drug areas law on the books for months. So why has it only been used once? We're looking at these topics and so much more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel, and I'm joined by my co-host, David Croman. Thank you for being with me, David. And I got another Mariners question for you. Do you buy this idea from Jerry Dipoto, president of baseball operations, that, okay, maybe the M's didn't make too many changes this offseason, but they were doing so well at the end of last year, and if they keep acting like that team, then we've got a winner for this year. What do you think?
That was exactly what he said last offseason, because they did. They ended well the season before also. So no, it doesn't hold any water. It's an excuse because the thing they thought they could do, they couldn't do, which is trade prospects for big league players, and nobody wanted their prospects. And because they won't spend any money, that's the only path they have. So once that closes off, then here we are.
Yeah, the Jorge Polanco era has begun yet again. Great to be with you, David. Thank you, as always. And thanks also to City Grind Espresso, the background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. John, very much thankful to you on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to the show patrons, a cavalcade of support last week. Vivian, Ted, Vicky, and Chris all jumped in at the $5 level. Thank you so much. That means they get access to Patrons First content, and we'll answer your questions about local politics on the show. So patrons, reach out, drop us a line at Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Spell it out at gmail.com. We'll work on answering your questions on the show. And anyone else, if you're not a patron, do it. Support the show on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. When you sign up, it's all about the merch. A cool sticker gets mailed out to you, too. A big thanks to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. And it's time to get going here, folks. Time for Right Here, Right Now. Well, there's plenty happening with the Seattle City Council this week. More public hearing activity on the comprehensive plan. But I wanted to talk with you briefly, David, about this issue kind of creeping through the council this week on converting commercial property to residential. There's this sales tax deferral for developers meant to entice them that the council is working on passing through right now. Not a very well-attended public hearing on this issue on Tuesday. Mainly a lot of developers saying, hey, you needed to do this yesterday so we can build more housing. I just had a thought about this. Is this going to work? Is it going to entice enough developers to actually get in the game that they're going to do this, and it's actually going to have an impact on Seattle's housing crisis, and especially its affordable housing crisis?
Yeah, I've basically just taken a believe it when I see it approach to talk of converting offices to housing. I know it's happened at least once, maybe a few times, in some kind of smaller low-rise buildings, but it has not happened on any sort of large scale. I think if it did, it would be these maybe older buildings that have been used for offices. The downtown high-rise that's basically everyone has concluded would be far more expensive to try and convert those to housing than it would be to build new housing. So you never say never, but it just has not happened on any sort of grand scale anywhere, as far as I know. So every little piece sort of makes a dent in the housing shortage, and that's fine. But as far as a fix for the shortage of housing in Seattle, this so far does not appear to be it. And I don't know that there was anyone out there who seriously thought it would be, but it was a bit of a pipe dream that, hey, office vacancies are high.
Sure.
Housing needs are also high. Hey, there's a nice fit here. It's just the logistics of it have been challenging to make work.
I think so too, and the dollars as well. I was looking in the city report on this. So imagine you have a $140 million construction project is what the city is positing here. So this is for maybe 200 units of residential development here. The actual cost savings would be about $10 million. So I mean, is that enough? It's about a 7% reduction in total development costs as seen by the city. I know these developers work on low margins, but that's really difficult. And I guess this gets me to my next question here, David. Is downtown part of the answer for density overall from the city? We're talking so much about the comprehensive plan right now. I just wonder how these different parts of the city, through whatever you try to do, is it office redevelopment, turning them into residential units? Is it some other way to activate downtown that you could actually involve that downtown neighborhood a little bit more in the comprehensive plan conversation? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you could, I mean, because there are parts of downtown still, like every now and then you'll see a picture of it where, if you kind of look at more the northern end of downtown,
Yeah.
getting into like Union, you can see this fairly clear cap on the high rises. So, I mean, I think a contribution would be that people point to is just let those buildings go higher, as high
Mm,
as developers want. I mean, it's a downtown, why not?
yeah.
It's never quite as easy as that, but
Yeah.
again, as far as converting downtown office buildings to housing, I'm skeptical that's ever really going to happen.
Yeah.
Um, there's actually a development kind of near the Seattle Times office that began and is fairly far along in that the foundation is there. It's a really
Yep.
deep hole. It's actually in where the old Seattle Times building used to
Yep.
be.
Yep. Hmm.
That the plan for that was to be office buildings. It has not budged. There's been no construction on it for at least a year.
Mm,
There used to be crews there every day. Now their crews aren't there at all. And I don't know if this is 100%, but I heard that part of it was the developers were trying to figure out how to change course and turn this into housing. So that
mm,
that might be another piece, which is less converting existing office buildings into housing, but planned office developments could take a turn, and instead of
I
doing
see.
offices, they build condos or apartments.
Right. It's going to depend on where they can make the money. And I know there aren't a lot of businesses clamoring to get office space downtown right now. So certainly something that developers will look at. Thank you for talking about that with me here, David. I did want to talk about, well, I guess the latest fire hose of activity from a Trump administration bound and determined to flood the zone, as they've put it. The city of Seattle has set up now a new select committee on federal administration and policy changes. I thought this was interesting, David, because it brought together some different council members, a more progressive voice in Alexis Mercedes Rink, a more moderate to conservative voice in Council President Sarah Nelson to stand up this committee. What did that say to you to see these two members of the council kind of taking the lead on this and joining forces in this effort?
Well, I think they are hearing a good bit from their constituents who maybe remember 2017 when there was this sort of coordinated pushback against the Trump administration, and you can kind of go back and debate how much that did, but I think
Mm,
it made the fairly anti-Trump residents of Seattle happy to see that, and
mm,
there isn't nearly as much of that this time around, and
true.
there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think, and I think elected officials are starting maybe to hear more from their constituents that
Hmm.
they would like to see some more response from City Hall, and
Sure.
I think especially as actions of the Trump administration get going, people have kind of specific things to be concerned about, and so I believe that both Councilmember Nelson and Councilmember Rink are hearing the same things um, and responding to that, and it's a fairly easy thing to do. I mean, a
Set up a
committee
committee.
doesn't
Yeah.
really,
Hmm.
yeah, it doesn't really obligate them to do anything, but
Mm.
has a venue for them to talk openly about it and for people to come and give public comment and express their fears. And who knows what kind of legislation will come out of this committee,
Hmm.
if any. But it is kind of a public forum for people to interface with City Hall if should they have concerns about the Trump administration.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going with this, David. And it sounds like their first meeting is going to be at the beginning of March. So we'll see how this stands up and gets going. I love a good committee meeting as much as anybody else, but what is a group like this actually going to be able to accomplish? Because we're seeing federal websites go down, we're seeing U.S. foreign aid simply getting cut off from several countries, and I just wonder what effect the city of Seattle can actually have when it comes to trying to go up against the Trump administration, if indeed they're cutting money for housing or something along those lines. What can they do other than letting people know, watch out? I mean, that's what I come to on this.
Yeah, I mean, the city council controls the purse strings, and so I could see a responsive role for the council, which is should the Trump administration succeed in making cuts
Hmm.
to I think kind of the biggest threat would maybe be transportation funds.
Yeah.
The council would need to convene to respond to that and figure out how, if or how they would backfill that dollar
Hmm.
amount. I know it had come up that maybe they create some kind of fund to like a safety net fund for if these dollars go away.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, I think a lot of the response in the first time around with first Trump administration,
Hmm.
most of the response came from the mayor's office and the city attorney's office
Right.
because, lawsuits are, if you don't like what the federal government is doing or you think it's illegal, that's kind of the avenue to challenge that. And the previous administrations have, this one not quite as much. Or,
Yeah.
if you're the executive branch, you can sort of dictate uh, how city employees react. The
Hmm.
Mayor Harrell sent out a directive telling people that if they, see any ICE agents conducting any kind of operations on City of Seattle property to inform the mayor's office. But yeah,
Yeah.
the city council's role here would really be if there's some kind of budgetary impact.
Right, right. That's where I would see it too. I'm interested to see what action this committee takes as well, David, but it's one of those things where, again, so many things are happening so fast and furiously, and there are different lawsuits being filed here. The ACLU, different states are pushing back on certain parts of the Trump administration. We'll see what the city ends up doing with this new committee again, starting at the beginning of March. We'll have some more information on that meeting coming up in a couple weeks. Okay, up next, Seattle has a new police chief officially on the job, and one of the first items on his to-do list, improving police recruitment for the SPD. What are the latest numbers saying about police hiring, and where's this trend going in 2025? David's been writing about this. We're going to learn more coming up on Now Hear This. Seattle's new permanent police chief, Sean Barnes, took up his official mantle at the end of last week. Plenty on his plate, including recruiting and hiring more officers, as he discussed with KOMO4's Chris Daniels.
We want to slow down attrition and starts there. We want to retain the people who we've trained and who are doing a great job and love this city. We want to do that as well and encourage people to give us a little more time to allow things to happen. We won't change things overnight, but we'll do it one step at a time, one day at a time, one call at a time.
David, you wrote about this issue with Sophia Schwartzwelder in the Seattle Times, and we reported about this on the podcast when these numbers came out at the end of last year. The SPD actually hired more officers than it lost in 2024 for the first time since 2019. It wasn't by much, 84 hires compared to 83 separations, so a difference of one there. But I just wanted to get your take on this, David. Do you see this as the beginning of a growing trend? Is it too early to tell, or how are you interpreting these numbers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about it, well, two things stood out. While the actual number of net officers is not that much. The things that stood out is the number of people leaving the department has slowed quite a bit, which I think, I mean, recruitment was hard, but I think retention was harder
Hmm.
through the years for Seattle Police Department. They were losing more than 150 officers a year, and these are experienced officers, and
Hmm.
you can have great recruitment efforts, but it doesn't really matter if that's how many people you're using every year. So,
Yeah.
their recruitment numbers actually weren't crazy higher than some other years, but it's just that the number of people who left was way down.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do with money. So,
I was going to
I
say now
think
they're the highest paid officers in the state. I mean that helps keep people around.
right. So, because if you were a police officer who was disillusioned with how the city was, uh, dealing with policing or the police department in 2020, you have left already,
Mm,
or so at this point, I would say, and then if you wanted to go take advantage of a signing bonus, you probably have already done that. So I think a lot of those people, that wave has kind of crested, and now
mm,
I see it settling more into a typical kind of churn. If there's always going to be retirements and resignations and firings and things like that, but it's just not the kinds of numbers that we saw in 2020, 21, 22. Um, and then, I also think the number of applications that they're getting is a good sign for them, which is so, maybe they didn't hire quite as many as they wanted. I mean, their
hmm.
goal really was 120, so they still
Right.
fell pretty far short of that with only
Hmm.
84. But the number of applications they got has essentially doubled,
Mm,
and that's not even with a full year of the new contract being in place. And so, I would be surprised if this was not a trend, frankly, like if this reversed itself this year, that would be
yeah.
surprising to me. I think it is probably an indication that things will or have shifted towards the other direction. The problem is they're trying to dig themselves out of a fairly large hole, and
Right.
this was a challenge even before 2020. Ed Murray wanted to hire more cops and was having a
Hmm.
hard time doing it. So,
Yep.
I think the department probably hit its bottom. But can it climb back to 1,300
Right.
deployable?
From 900 and
That
change.
seems
Yeah, that's a lot. Hmm.
that seems hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I wanted to see, I wanted to get your thoughts on where you see Chief Barnes going when it comes to hiring new officers, recruiting new officers. You pointed out in your piece that it's a situation where SPD is still trying to hire more female officers. They haven't really hit that 30% mark. It's closer to 15% in terms of those new recruits going in. Is Sean Barnes, as a chief, where do you think he is going to take this in terms of helping those numbers and really helping those numbers of women, especially entering the SPD, because that's a big, big thing that SPD is trying to do right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's as we've talked about, there are only so many levers you can really pull on this, and
Mm,
from my perspective, they have pulled the ones that are easily pulled
mm.
to kill the metaphor.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
but which is money and advertising and money, advertising, and bureaucracy, basically. And they have tried to address all those things, and I do think it has made a difference. Um,
Right. Bureaucracy, like cutting out the red tape so it's easier for people to apply, et cetera. Mm,
yeah,
hmm.
exactly. The other one is maybe a little more squishy and perhaps where Chief Barnes can come into play, which is reputation.
Yeah,
I think the new city council has made this a big part of their mandate, which is basically telling everyone, "Hey, we want you here, or we support you," that sort of thing. I don't know Chief Barnes well enough to know what his reputation is among sort of the larger police community, but
hmm.
that I would see as being, sh could he kind of uh, pull his contacts from outside of Seattle and convince people that, hey, Seattle's a place you really do want to come and work. That could make a difference.
Yeah, yeah, we'll see what happens there. I did want to talk about another public safety headline from the past few days that you've written about here. This is about Seattle's SODA law, stay out of drug areas. So as David reported in the Times, this law has been on the books for about 3 months. It's intended to keep people arrested from drug crimes out of neighborhoods where they committed their crimes. But this ordinance has been used by a judge just once since it took effect in October of last year. And David, there are a few pieces to this, I know, including how Council President Nelson reacted to your article. I'm going to get to that in a second. But first, what does this lack of usage mean to you? What are you seeing in this?
Well, I mean, it's a little hard to come up with a definitive take on this, except for that, that what struck me as interesting is this was a basically pitched as a urgent policy priority. It was
Right.
introduced in August, which is not usually when we see new legislation, and passed
Mhm.
just a month later.
Right. It
You know,
passed through the
that's a
council very quickly. That's right. That's
that's a
lightning
that's a
fast.
fast timeline. And
Yeah,
and in September, you don't see major legislation passing in September all that
because it's so
often.
close to the budget. Right. Hmm.
Right. And so, that would suggest that they had things teed up to really make use of this. And so it was surprising to me that it hadn't been used at all. And um, I think in some ways what it says is if your contention is that part of Seattle's public safety or disorder issues is that there is not enough kind of whatever you want to call it, accountability, arrests, law enforcement presence, this suggests that it may not have been because they were the police or prosecutors were being held back by any one policy, that it was kind of always about capacity and priorities in the first place. And just passing this law doesn't necessarily change those priorities or increase the capacity of people to do these arrests. And so I think what we're seeing basically is um, police still don't really see misdemeanor drugs as the most important thing for them to be doing.
Yeah.
And the mayor's office has, while they say, they are support arresting people who they think should be arrested, their
Sure.
focus has really been, at least for downtown, more about kind of, revitalization,
Hmm.
activation, programming, cleaning, that sort, this sort of
Yeah.
not arrest approach. And so, on its surface, it looks like the city attorney's office is just not using this tool. But my sense is what's really happening is the city attorney's office is not getting the kind of cases that would make sense to use this tool. And I
Yeah.
think you mentioned Council President
Yeah.
Nelson's tweet about
Right.
this.
Right.
I think for City Attorney Davison and Council President Nelson, it is quite frustrating that they are not getting the kinds of cases that could be used here.
Yeah, and talk about that. Would you mind? You mentioned that Council President Nelson was on the social platform X talking about your piece a little bit. What did she say? What did you glean from that? What was your reaction to what she was talking about?
Well, first say it's a little frustrating. I reached out to her office several times and they didn't want to talk for this article.
That's
So
unfortunate.
that
Okay.
that's one piece. And then, in her tweet, she says basically, the council acted with urgency here, and now we need the mayor's office and SPD to come along, which is interesting. This is, you don't often see in Seattle politics kind of people blaming each other for
Mm,
stuff, and especially in this context, because on a surface level, it would look like this is a city government that's fairly united in
yeah.
what it's politically, and
Hmm.
yet here's the council president basically saying, I don't think SPD or the mayor's office is doing enough on this piece.
Mm,
So that's interesting. I don't really know what to make of that.
no.
But we've heard that a couple times from Council President Nelson. She has expressed her frustration with specifically the mayor's office on a few occasions, with jail capacity and
Right.
things like, and some of the minimum wage stuff too. Um, so it's just, but it is interesting to see it in writing. Her basically saying, "Hey, the council has done its piece. Now it's time for SPD to do its job and the mayor's office to do its job."
Yeah, yeah, calling it out for certain. So that's something that I know you're going to be keeping an eye on there. It reminds me of talking to Councilmember Moore not too long ago about the stay out of areas of prostitution laws that have been in place, and police haven't really been using those either. So, yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely some concern over that. It does come down to starting with that enforcement piece and bringing it through the system. So a lot to look at there. Thank you for that, David. All right, well, coming up,
Yep.
another public safety issue here, looking at a better way to provide protection for bus drivers in King County after the killing of a driver near the end of last year. We're going to discuss it coming up on What's Next. So, King County Metro Transit has just unveiled a new mechanism meant to improve driver safety. This is an improved version, if you will, of the sneeze guard they put in place during the COVID pandemic. You'll remember Sean Yim was the bus driver killed December 18th of last year when a passenger got into an argument with him, pepper sprayed him after pushing that sneeze guard aside. Yim got off the bus to confront. Richard Sitzlak was found stabbed to death nearby. Sitzlak has been charged with murder and assault. David, I wanted to get your take on this because you ride buses. I do too. I don't think as much as you do, but will putting up a pivoting 75-pound gate inside these buses make drivers and passengers feel safer, or how do you look at this?
Yeah, I think it's something. The
Yeah,
union in particular has been really clamoring for some kind of step here. Um, I couldn't say one way or the other if it's going to make a difference. I think, I know that this is an easy decision because bus drivers and the union, bus drivers will say this and the unions will say this, is they like having that interaction with passengers. And I
right.
think a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them take very seriously, they're not just chaperones. They do
Hmm.
take very seriously their interactions with the public. And
Yeah,
bus drivers, among a few other professions, are in this interesting situation where they're kind of the frontline workers on a lot of
sure.
societal failures, mental
Yeah,
illness and drug addiction and poverty. And, um,
yeah,
so a lot of them are doing jobs that on the surface would be way above their pay grade.
sure.
But I think a lot of them take that seriously. And this, I think could be seen as a barrier to doing that. At the same time, I know a lot of them also feel really unsafe. And, the King County Metro stopped making stops at 12th and Jackson, for
Right.
example. And,
Hmm.
it's a thing that the union has been clamoring for. And so, will it make a difference? I don't know. I
Yeah,
couldn't say. But,
yeah.
I certainly sympathize with bus drivers
Oh,
on
no
several
kidding.
levels.
Yeah, it's in between assaults. They're definitely happening every month, and I know the bus drivers. I mean, there's a lot of drivers out there that are really scared, and I guess that's the next question for me because I remember you reporting on this as a transportation reporter not too long ago. That whole situation of getting more people to be, uh, well, signing up to be bus drivers, trying to register for that job. I mean, where is this profession going? Is a public safety investment like this going to help attract more people to the job, or how do you look at that? And any thoughts on that larger trend of trying to employ people at Metro Transit, which has had a tough time keeping people, driving their buses and working on their buses just as mechanics too?
Yeah, I don't know what the latest is. Like you said, I wrote about that a good amount when I was on the transportation beat. I
Yeah,
don't have an update.
yeah,
I hope at the time when I was writing about it was that, higher pay and a new union contract could make a difference.
hmm
At the time, they were kind of optimistic, but I don't know. I'd have to ask,
right,
my Limboom or my colleagues over there
yeah,
what they've seen. If it's, but I mean, again, it's a frontline job, kind of like police. It's just I don't know that there's any city that's having an easy time attracting these kinds of workers.
yeah, yeah, and having some sort of protection in place is certainly what the union has been pushing for. So I'm hopeful this does mean something good for drivers because again, we're talking about some protection they've been calling on for a while, especially in light of what happened with Sean Yim, that bus driver who was killed at the end of last year. All right, well, David, it is time to wrap up with you here, and I just wanted to get your take on it. I'm always looking at the calendar, and some other people in my family do this too. They're always telling me, I know spring is a long time off, but when the sun starts setting closer to 5 o'clock in the Seattle area, is that a sign of hope, or is that, oh man, we got to wait another couple months until this actually turns into a real day where the sun is setting at a later hour? Is that 5 o'clock cutoff? Does that mean something to you? It's a big deal with my wife and my kids. I don't know why they're so into it, but what are your
It
thoughts
mean
on it?
it means something to me for sure, especially now that I have kids
Ah,
that go to bed at 7
okay.
or so. So the difference between not being able to be outside from basically 4:15 to 7,
Mm,
that's a lot harder than, if we can keep them outside until 5,
hmm
then that's only a couple hours of inside time. So as a parent, this year in particular, the 5 o'clock sunsets feel very important and much appreciated.
I
So
like
I'm
it.
already enjoying the longer days, and it's only going to get better from here.
That's what I like to. So I think you're in the same camp that I was in when my kids were much smaller, which is get them outside and just gas them as much as you can. Is that how you guys are
Sure.
approaching it?
And our son in particular, who's 2, is never unhappy outside. He's
That's
always
awesome.
happy to be outside,
Wow.
and sometimes is quite unhappy to be inside. So we prefer to keep him outside.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, you got it. You just got to keep running them. That's
Yeah,
the key, and that's awesome that he loves being out there, just like his pop. Chip off the old block. I love hearing it. Well, David, thank you so much. Thanks to everybody who's listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics and get all the parenting advice you're looking for too. Thanks again to patrons who support the show, especially Vivian, Ted, Vicky, and Chris. Thanks for jumping on board in the past week. If you're not a patron, make it happen. Support the show for just $5 a month on Patreon would be greatly appreciated. You can hear us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you like to listen. And thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2025.